The air in the Global Strategic Command Center aboard the USS Defiance was cold, filtered, and thick with the silent hum of quantum servers. It was a cathedral of data, where light moved faster than thought and war was a series of cascading symbols on holographic displays. Into the sterile sanctuary walked Alara Vance. She was a ghost at the feast, a civilian analyst assigned by some faceless bureaucracy in Langley. She carried a worn leather satchel instead of a datapad, wore simple gray slacks and a blouse instead of a crisp uniform, and her hair, streaked with silver at the temples, was tied back in a simple, functional knot. She was an anomaly, an analog intrusion into a digital world, and the bright young officers of Admiral Marcus Thorne's elite staff noticed. They noticed the way she moved with a quiet economy, her eyes scanning the room not with awe, but with a flat, assessing gaze that seemed to catalog weaknesses in the architecture. Lieutenant Commander Kalen, Thorne's wunderkind of signals intelligence, watched her find an unused terminal in a forgotten corner. He leaned over to his peer, Lieutenant Chun. "Look at that," Kalen murmured, a smirk playing on his lips. "They sent us a librarian to archive the logs. Probably got lost on her way to the ship's historical records." Chun chuckled. "Careful, Kalen. She might shush you." The mockery was a low current running beneath the surface of the CIC's professional decorum. Vance felt it but did not acknowledge it. She had felt worse. She set up her station with methodical calm, plugging in a standard-issue terminal but leaving it dark. From her satchel, she removed a spiral-bound notebook and a simple black fountain pen. She unscrewed the cap, the metallic click barely audible over the server fans, and set it beside the notebook. Then she sat perfectly still and simply watched. She watched the flow of information, the posture of the officers, the subtle tells of stress or confidence in the way they manipulated their screens. She was a rock in the stream of data, and the water parted around her, oblivious. The main briefing began. Admiral Thorne stood before the primary hollow table, a monolith of a man whose presence filled the room as completely as the pressure of the deep sea. His voice was gravel and command, forged in decades of service. The topic was a growing menace in the Caspian sector. A ghost fleet, a flotilla of unidentified hostiles striking commercial shipping with impunity. They were fast, precise, and left no electronic signature. They called them the Phantoms. "They're using state-of-the-art stealth composites and broad-spectrum ECM," Kalen reported, his fingers dancing across a light-based interface. "Their emissions profile is less than a fishing trawler's. We can't get a lock, we can't get a trace. They appear, they strike, they vanish." "They're not vanishing," a quiet voice said from the corner. Every head turned. Alara Vance had spoken. Her voice was low, devoid of inflection, yet it cut through the hum of the CIC like a razor. Admiral Thorne's eyes, chips of blue ice, narrowed. He did not like interruptions, especially from civilians he hadn't been properly briefed on. "Who is this?" he demanded, his gaze sweeping over Vance with open disdain. "Alara Vance, sir," she said, her eyes fixed on the hollow display. "Civilian analyst, attached from Langley." "I know what the paperwork says," Thorne snapped. "I'm asking what you're doing speaking in my briefing. You've been on this vessel for 4 hours. Their communications aren't being jammed," Vance continued, ignoring the threat in his tone as if it were irrelevant background noise. "They're being layered. It's an old signals doctrine. You don't block the signal, you hide it inside a broader, seemingly benign carrier wave. Like hiding a whisper in a shout." Kalen scoffed openly. "Ma'am, with all due respect, we're dealing with quantum-encrypted burst transmissions. There are no carrier waves, that's analog thinking." "War is always analog," Vance replied, her gaze finally shifting to meet Kalen's. "The physics don't change." Thorne's patience, a notoriously finite resource, evaporated. He saw a washed-up bureaucrat, a relic sent to his bleeding-edge command center to be put out to pasture. She was a distraction, an insult to the finely tuned machine he had built. He took a step toward her, his shadow falling across her small workstation. "Ms. Vance," he began, his voice dropping to a dangerously low growl. This is the beating heart of the Fifth Fleet. We are not a university debating society. We are engaged in active threat assessment against a technologically superior adversary. We do not have time for quaint theories from the history books. He paused, letting the weight of his disapproval settle on her. She did not flinch. She simply looked back at him, her expression unreadable. This placid refusal to be intimidated enraged him more than any argument could have. Your presence here is an administrative error I intend to rectify. You are a civilian. You are a guest. And you are out of your depth. You will remain silent, or you will be removed. He leaned in closer. His voice a venomous whisper meant only for her. I don't know who you are or what desk you were hiding behind back in Virginia, but you are finished here. Now get the hell out of my CIC. He didn't shout the final words. He spoke them with a cold, absolute finality. It was an execution. He turned his back on her, a gesture of ultimate dismissal, and faced the hollow table once more. Kalen, continue. Find me those phantoms. The officers around the room studiously avoided looking at Vance. The humiliation was a tangible thing, a shroud that had been thrown over her. She remained seated, her hands resting on her closed notebook. For a long moment, she did not move. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, she screwed the cap back onto her fountain pen. The small click was an act of defiance in the suffocating silence. She did not leave. The crisis, when it came, did not arrive with the roar of a missile but with the silent, venomous speed of a digital serpent. It began as a flicker on the main screen, a line of corrupted code that Kalen swiped away with an annoyed flick of his wrist. Then another flicker and another. Within seconds, the hollow table dissolved into a waterfall of nonsensical green characters. Red alerts began to flash on secondary monitors, one after another, like a string of firecrackers. What is this? Thorne barked. Report. I don't know, sir. Kalen's voice was tight with rising panic. It's a cascade failure. Something's in our system. It's not just jamming. It's rewriting our core protocols. Firewalls are down. I'm losing tactical displays. The calm, controlled environment of the CIC fractured. Alarms blared, a discordant symphony of failure. The lights overhead flickered, plunging the room into momentary darkness before emergency power kicked in, bathing everything in a hellish red glow. The hum of the servers became a high-pitched scream of protest. We're blind, Admiral, Chun shouted from navigation. GPS is down, inertial navigation is compromised. We're getting ghost readings everywhere. Thorne stood rigid amidst the chaos, his knuckles white where he gripped the edge of the dead hollow table. His ship, his command, his entire world of perfect information had been snuffed out in less than a minute. They were adrift in the Caspian, deaf, dumb, and blind, with an enemy of unknown strength circling in the dark. He shouted orders, but they were desperate and reactive. Get me a hard line to the engine room. Reboot the primary servers. Isolate the network. His officers, the best and brightest the Navy had to offer, scrambled to obey, but their tools were useless. They were pilots without planes, surgeons without scalpels. Their fingers flew across dead touchscreens, their voices calling out reports of escalating failure. They were fighting a ghost that had already possessed their house. The sophisticated cyber attack was more than a breach. It was a vivisection. It wasn't just disabling them. It was actively feeding them false information, turning their own systems into a hall of mirrors. A dozen phantom fleets now appeared on the failing screens, surrounding them, making it impossible to know what was real and what was a digital echo. Panic, cold and sharp, began to seep into the room. The young officers, so confident just minutes before, now looked at each other with wide, fearful eyes. Their technological superiority had been a shield, and now that shield was shattered. They were just men and women in a steel box, floating in hostile waters. Through it all, Alara Vance sat in her corner. The red emergency light cast deep shadows across her face, making her features seem carved from stone. While the digital world crumbled around her, she opened her notebook. The chaos, the alarms, the shouts, they were just noise. She filtered it out. She listened to the rhythm of the failure. The precise timing of the system crashes was not random. The pattern of the data corruption was not arbitrary. It was a signature, a complex, brutal, and terrifyingly familiar one. She stood up. No one noticed her at first. They were too consumed by their own dying screens. She walked calmly across the CIC, her soft-soled shoes making no sound on the deck plating. She moved past a frantic Kalen, who was trying to manually patch a connection with a mess of fiber-optic cables. She approached the one piece of equipment in the room that was immune to the digital assault. It was a relic, a massive paper maritime chart table bolted to the bulkhead, a holdover from a previous generation of warship. A set of parallel rulers, a compass, and grease pencils lay in a tray beside it. It was a museum piece, an object of derision for the younger officers. Vance unrolled a chart of the Caspian sector, its paper crinkling in the tense silence. She flattened it with her palms and picked up a red grease pencil. Kalen, catching the movement out of the corner of his eye, paused his frantic work. He stared at her, incredulous. "What in God's name are you doing?" he hissed, his voice cracking with stress. "Are you going to draw them a map to our location?" Vance didn't look up. "They already have it," she said, her voice a low anchor in the storm of noise. She began to make marks on the chart. A line here, an X there. She wasn't guessing. She was plotting. Using the last known positions of the fleet before the crash, the time of the attack, and something else, something that wasn't on any sensor reading. She was factoring in the deep water currents of the Absheron sill, the known salinity gradients, the bathymetric data of the underwater trenches that crisscrossed the seabed like scars. "The cyber attack is a feint," she said, her voice carrying across the now quieter SASE, as officers paused to watch the strange woman with the grease pencil. "It's a brilliant one, designed to make us panic, to make us look at our screens and doubt our own eyes. It's meant to paralyze our minds, not just our systems." She drew a large circle around a specific, notoriously treacherous area known as the Dirya Ikora trench system. "But the attack itself tells us where they are. This level of coordinated electronic warfare requires immense power. You can't run it off a frigate's batteries. You need a stable, massive power source. And to coordinate it without any detectable emissions, you need to be close. Very close." Thorn, his face grim in the red light, walked over to the chart table. He looked down at her work, his expression a mixture of desperation and deep skepticism. "What are you suggesting, Ms. Vance? That they're in the Dirya Ikora? That's impossible. It's a navigational nightmare. Sheer canyon walls, unpredictable magnetic interference. No modern fleet would risk it." "A modern fleet wouldn't," Vance agreed, and for the first time she looked directly at the Admiral. There was a cold fire in her eyes he hadn't seen before. "But this isn't a modern commander. He doesn't think in terms of network-centric warfare. He thinks in terms of terrain, deception, psychology. He's using the trench to mask his fleet's thermal and acoustic signatures. He's using the canyon's magnetic interference to help hide his power source. He's not a ghost. He's a submariner." A hush fell over the room. The idea was so wildly contrary to all the data they had been chasing. They had been looking for a fleet of stealth ships on the surface, not a wolf pack of submarines hiding in the mud. "That's a guess," Kalen stammered, looking from the chart to Vance. "You have no data to support that." "The signature of the attack is the data," Vance countered calmly. "The layered signals, the psychological warfare, the choice of a complex battle space that negates technological advantage. There's only one commander who ever used all three with this level of mastery. A man who built his entire doctrine around the principle of turning his enemy's strength into a weakness." She picked up a black pencil and wrote a single name on the edge of the chart. Valerius. An older communications officer, a chief petty officer with 3 decades of service. Gasped. "Valerius? Sir, that's not possible. He was reported killed 20 years ago in the Black Sea incident." "Reports can be wrong," Vance said. "He's alive. And he's down there." Thorne stared at the name, then at Vance. Desperation was a powerful motivator. His way had failed. His technology was broken. His brilliant staff was paralyzed. This strange, quiet woman was the only person in the room with a theory that wasn't based on dead data. It was a mad leap of faith, but it was better than sitting blind and waiting for the torpedoes to hit. "All right, Ms. Vance," Thorne said, his voice hard as steel. "Let's play this out. We're blind. Our sensors are useless. How do we prove your theory? How do we find them in that rat's nest of a trench?" This was the test. It wasn't enough to have a theory. She needed a solution, and she had one. "We don't use our modern sensors," she said, her focus absolute. "Valerius is expecting that. He's counting on us trying to burn through his EW with high-frequency active sonar, which he can easily spoof or ignore. We have to use something he won't be expecting. Something he might even find insulting." She walked over to the sonar station, where a young petty officer third class named Anya Sharma was staring at a screen full of static. "Petty officer," Vance said gently, "does this ship still have a UQC-1 transducer?" Sharma looked up, confused. "The Gertrude? Ma'am, that's an underwater telephone. It's ancient. It hasn't been part of standard tactical deployment since." "I know what it is." Vance cut her off. "Is it still functional?" Sharma nodded slowly. "Yes, ma'am. It's on the auxiliary power grid. It's a simple analog system. The attack wouldn't have touched it." "Good," Vance said. She turned back to Thorne. "Sir, I need your permission to send a single, unsecured acoustic pulse into the Dirya Ikora trench. A specific frequency and duration. It's a call sign. An old one. Valerius is arrogant. He believes he's the smartest man in any ocean. If he hears this specific knock, his doctrine dictates a response. He won't be able to resist confirming that he's outsmarted his old ghost." The room was silent, save for the lingering hum of the emergency systems. Thorne was being asked to give up his last shred of stealth, to send an unsecured, antique signal into a canyon where an enemy he couldn't see might be waiting. It was madness. It was also the only plan he had. He looked at Vance, at the utter certainty in her eyes. It wasn't arrogance. It was knowledge. He made his decision. "Do it," he said to Sharma. Then he looked at Vance. "Give her the sequence." Vance leaned over Sharma's console. She didn't touch the controls. She simply spoke a series of numbers. Frequency 25.5 kilohertz. Pulse length 0.7 seconds. Then a 2-second pause. Then a second pulse 0.3 seconds. Send it on a bearing of 0.95. Sharma's fingers flew over the old, clunky controls of the Gertrude system. The analog dials felt alien after years of touchscreens. "Sequence loaded, ma'am. Ready to transmit." "On my mark," Vance said. She closed her eyes for a second, a silent communion with a past only she understood. "Mark." Sharma pressed the button. A deep, almost subaudible thump resonated through the hull of the Defiance. A single, lonely question sent out into the crushing dark of the sea. The wait was agonizing. Nothing in the CIC made a sound. Every person in the room held their breath, their eyes fixed on Sharma's sonar screen, a simple old-fashioned waterfall display that showed nothing but the faint green fuzz of ambient noise. 1 minute passed, then 2. Kalen shook his head slightly, a look of pitying condescension returning to his face. It was a fool's errand. "Nothing, ma'am," Sharma whispered, her voice laced with disappointment. Vance didn't move. "Wait," she commanded, her voice soft but absolute. 30 more seconds crawled by. Then it happened. A tiny flicker on the screen. A single, faint line of brighter green light, almost imperceptible. It was weak, distorted by the trench's bizarre acoustics, but it was there. Ping. The sound was played over the CIC speakers, a simple, pure tone that cut through the tension like a knife. It was a return, a single, solid sonar contact. Sharma's eyes went wide. Contact. Bearing 096. Range 40,000 yards. Deep in the trench. Before the shock of the first contact could even register, Another line appeared on the screen, just to the left of the first. Ping. Second contact. Sharma yelled, her voice now electric with excitement. Same range, different bearing. Ping, ping, ping. More lines appeared, blooming on the green screen like deadly flowers. For 5, 6 contacts. A whole squadron. They were exactly where Vance said they would be. The ghost fleet was real, and it was a wolf pack of submarines, hiding in the dark. She had made them answer the phone. The CIC exploded into controlled, focused action. The paralysis was broken. They had a target. They had a purpose. Officers were shouting coordinates, weapon systems were being brought online on isolated power, and the ship was coming back to life. In the center of it all, Admiral Thorne stared at Alara Vance, his face a mask of disbelief and dawning awe. The chaos she had predicted had come to pass. The solution she had offered had worked. The enemy she had named had answered. He strode over to her, his boots loud on the deck plating. The entire command staff fell silent, watching the confrontation. "Who are you?" Thorne demanded, but the venom was gone from his voice. It was replaced by a raw, urgent need to understand. That wasn't an analyst's guess. That was a hunter's instinct. "What is Project Chimera?" Kalen, who in the midst of the chaos had used a secure satellite link that had momentarily come back online to run Vance's name against a deep-level intelligence archive, had just found the same term. He held a datapad, his hand shaking slightly. The file was 99% redacted. There were only a few words, a commendation, and a single grainy black and white photograph. Vance looked at the Admiral, her expression unchanging. She didn't answer his question directly. Instead, she turned to the chart. "Sir, they've responded, which means Valerius knows we've found him. He'll move to disperse his fleet and hunt us while we're still blind. We have approximately 10 minutes before his first torpedoes are in the water. We need to act now." She had taken command of the room not through rank or volume, but through sheer, undeniable competence. Thorne, a man who had not deferred to another's judgment in 20 years, found himself listening. He looked at the datapad Kalen was holding out to him. He took it. On the screen was the photo. 5 figures in old, Cold War-era tactical gear, standing in front of a rust-streaked submarine. Their faces were blacked out by Sensor's ink, all except one. A much younger Alara Vance, her face hard and unsmiling, stared back at him across the decades. Below the photo was a single line of text. "For actions conducted under the authority of Project Chimera, the operator known as Nix is awarded the Iron Star, First Class." Nix, the name echoed in the recesses of Thorne's memory. A ghost story, a legend whispered in the halls of naval intelligence. Nix was not a person. It was a myth, a call sign attached to a series of impossible black operations during the tense twilight of the old wars. An operative who hunted the deepest and darkest threats, a specialist in finding men like Valerius. Nix and her team, Chimera, had been the ones who had supposedly cornered and killed him in the Black Sea all those years ago. Thorne looked from the face of the young, hard-eyed operator on the screen to the quiet, middle-aged woman standing before him. The same eyes, the same stillness. He finally understood. He wasn't dealing with a librarian. He was in the presence of a legend he didn't even believe existed. "Ms. Vance," he said, the name feeling inadequate on his tongue. He gestured to the chart, a silent transfer of command. "What is your recommendation?" The respect in his voice was a physical force in the room. Kalen and the other officers stared, their earlier mockery turning to something akin to religious reverence. Vance picked up the grease pencil. Her movements were fluid, precise. "Valerius expects a direct counterattack. He'll have his subs positioned to ambush us if we charge into the trench. He thinks we're a cornered, blind animal. We will not be." She began to draw a new set of lines on the chart, a complex, elegant trap. "We don't go into the trench. We make him come out." "Sharma," she said, her voice sharp, "give me our ship's acoustic signature profile, the loudest one we have. Full power cavitation at flank speed." "Ma'am," Sharma asked, confused. "We are going to make this carrier sound like it's panicking, running for its life," Vance explained. "We'll run north, along the trench line. Valerius is a predator. He won't be able to resist the chase. He'll think we're fleeing blindly." She drew an arrow showing the carrier's path. Then she drew a second set of arrows, representing the submarines, emerging from the trench in pursuit. "But as we run," she continued, her finger tracing a path on the map, "we drop a screen of our own. Our escort destroyers will launch their entire complement of SLQ-25 Nixie torpedo decoys. Not as a defense, but as a fence. We'll use their acoustic signatures to build a wall behind him, sealing the entrance to the trench." We heard him. Her pencil stopped at a narrow bottleneck at the northern end of the trench system, a place of shallow water and treacherous rock formations. "The Dardanelles maw. We force him into the maw. His numbers are a disadvantage. He can't maneuver. He'll be a fish in a barrel. And that's where our attack helicopters, flying blind on inertial navigation to the coordinates I give them, will be waiting to drop their magnetic anomaly detectors and their torpedoes. We won't need sonar. We'll be right on top of him." It was a breathtakingly audacious plan. It was psychology, terrain, and violence woven into a single, perfect strategy. It used their own perceived weakness, their blindness, as a weapon of deception. It was a Valerius strategy used against Valerius. Thorn looked at the plan laid out on the paper chart. It was brutal, elegant, and had the unmistakable ring of truth. He turned to his communications officer. "Get me the fleet commander. Use any means necessary. Transmit these orders." He didn't look at Vance as he gave the command. He didn't need to. For the first time, they were thinking as one. The next hour was the most intense of Thorn's career. He relayed Vance's instructions, which were translated into the clipped, formal language of naval commands. The great carrier turned, its engine screaming as it feigned a desperate flight. The destroyers laid their acoustic fence. The helicopters launched into the dark, flying on faith and a set of coordinates written on a paper map. In the CIC, they had no screens, no data links. They could only listen. They listened to the thrum of their own engines, the distant explosions of the decoy launches, and the vast, empty silence of the sea. Alara Vance stood by the sonar station, her head tilted slightly, as if she could hear the battle unfolding in her mind. Then the sounds came, faint at first, then clearer. The high-pitched whine of helicopter rotors, relayed through an open comms channel. The splash of ordnance hitting the water. And then, a series of deep, booming concussions that vibrated through the hull of the Defiance. Secondary explosions. The death of submarines. The plan had worked. The trap had been sprung. Silence returned. A different kind of silence. The silence of victory. Slowly, shakily, the ship systems began to come back online. The cyber attack, its controllers eliminated, withered, and died. Screens flickered to life, showing clear, clean data. The tactical plot showed wreckage and oil slicks in the Dardanelles maw. There were no hostile contacts left. The phantoms were gone. The tension in the CIC broke. Cheers erupted. Officers clapped each other on the back, their faces slick with sweat and relief. Kalen slumped against a console, letting out a long, shuddering breath. Thorn stood at the center of it all, but his eyes were not on the screens. They were on Alara Vance. She showed no sign of triumph. She simply stood, watching the data confirm what she already knew. Her work was done. Later, when the adrenaline had subsided and the CIC had returned to a state of quiet efficiency, Admiral Thorn sat alone in his command chair, staring at the polished surface of his desk. The door hissed open and Alara Vance entered. She walked to his desk, her worn leather satchel in her hand. She said nothing. She simply opened the satchel and took something out. She placed 5 objects on the gleaming wood, arranging them in a neat line. They were not metals. They were small, heavy stars, forged from dark, rough iron. They looked ancient, brutal. Each one felt impossibly heavy with history. Thorn looked at them, then up at her. He understood. This wasn't a trophy. It was a memorial. Chimera, he said, his voice barely a whisper. Vance nodded once, a small, tired gesture. There were 5 of us on the team that hunted him the first time, she said, her voice quiet. The official report said he was killed and that we all made it back. The report was wrong on both counts. She gently touched each star. Alec, Maya, Sergei, Ren. This was our marker. For a job finished. She was the only one left to finish it. She had carried this burden for 20 years, waiting for the ghost to reappear. The mission was never over. Today she had finally put her comrades to rest. She had repaid the debt. Thorne looked at the 5 iron stars, then at the woman standing before him, a living monument to a secret war. He saw the deep, abiding weariness in her eyes, the cost of a lifetime spent in the shadows. All his pride, his arrogance, his rigid adherence to protocol, it all crumbled away, leaving only a profound, humbling respect. He stood up from his chair, a gesture of deference he hadn't made for anyone below the rank of Fleet Admiral in decades. He didn't offer a salute or a handshake. Such things were insufficient. He simply met her gaze and gave a slow, deliberate nod. It was a silent apology, a recognition of sacrifice, and an acknowledgement of a warrior who had saved them all. In the silent CIC, every officer present stood as well, their earlier mockery forgotten, replaced by an awed, reverent silence. Hours later, the ship was quiet, slicing through the calm, dark waters of the Caspian Sea. The crisis was over. The reports were being written. In the CIC, the night watch crew monitored silent screens. Alara Vance was not at a terminal. She stood by the large, armored viewport that looked out over the ship's bow. The moon was a silver coin in the black sky, its light casting a lonely path across the endless water. In her hands, she held the 5 iron stars. She took a soft, worn cloth from her pocket and began to polish them, one by one. Her movements were slow, rhythmic, a ritual of remembrance. She wasn't celebrating a victory. She was mourning her dead, keeping their memory bright against the encroaching darkness. The reflected moonlight glinted off the dark, pitted metal, each star a tiny black hole absorbing the light around it. A figure approached, moving quietly so as not to disturb her. It was Lieutenant Commander Kalen. He held 2 ceramic mugs. He stopped beside her, not speaking, and placed one of the mugs on the windowsill next to her. It was filled with hot, black coffee. He didn't offer apologies or platitudes. He didn't ask about Project Chimera or the name Valerius. He simply offered a small human comfort, a silent admission of his own folly and a gesture of profound respect. Vance paused her polishing and looked at the mug, then at him. She gave a faint, almost imperceptible nod of acknowledgement. Kalen nodded back, then turned and walked away, leaving her to her vigil. Alara Vance picked up the warm mug, its heat a small comfort against the cold weight of the iron in her other hand. She took a sip, her eyes never leaving the horizon. She stood there for a long time, a silent guardian watching the line where the dark water met the dark sky, her watch finally, truly, over.